Good day, everyone. I am Alan Paha, and today I'm going to be talking to you about another very important topic in which all of us can relate and can reflect to, and that is a part of literature. So I'm going to be talking about the fictional genre of literature. So, what is fictional genres of literature? These are written stories about people and events that are not real. A type of literature that tells stories which are imagined by the writer. So, when I say fictional, it is more about the imaginative idea of a person. It's not about factual, but it's more on the imaginative idea of a person. What are the types of fiction literature? Number one is drama, poetry, fantasy, fable, fairy tales, short story, folklore, horror, and legend. So now I'm gonna be talking first about on what is a drama. A drama is a genre of literature that subject for compositions are in dramatic art in the way it is presented. As what you can see as picture here, this one in the red is like a theater. Someone will portray a role, it's convey emotions through acting. When we say drama, it's a form of expressions using a facial expressions because gestures, movement, voice, and it's about performance live. And also it's about saying about the character. So the next is the poetry. What is a poetry? A poetry is a verse and rhythmic writing with imagery that evokes an emotional response from the reader. Poetry. Poetry is huge. Actually, poetry has two types, the measured or unmeasured types of poetry. When I say about measured, it talks about the rhyming, the matter of the words are being counted, are being measured. Example of these are the haiku from Japan, which has 7 lines. Another is called for stanza, the fourth lines in one stanza. And the other type is the unmeasured, which is all about the free verse poem. Measuring line method is not needed. It's just all about on how going the author is going to express his or her idea through a poem. So these are one of the most famous poetry writer of all time. So we have here Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Edgar Allan Poe, the Stevenson, Walt Whitman, Carl Sandburg, Ogden Nash, and some of these are like Walt Whitman. And in the Philippines, we have Dr. Jose Rizal, our national hero, who is the one of the most famous Filipino poetry writer. The next is the fantasy. What is a fantasy? A fantasy is the forming of mental images with strains or other worldly settings or characters. So it's beyond imagination. Kids, and even though young kids at heart love fantasy movies. I have example here, and these are the Harry Potter and the Chronicles of Narnia. These two are some of the most famous fantasy series that all of us had watched and adored. Fantasies are very rich in very magical things, very unbelievable things. Next is the fable. What is a fable? It is a story about animals which is intended to teach a lesson. When I say about fable, the characters are being involved here are usually animals, in which their intention is to teach us lesson. Example of these are the lion and the mouse and the three little pigs. Next is the fairy tales. It is a story of wonder tales are kind of folk tale and fable. In fairy tales, usually they have the princesses, the king and queens, and the prince. I have here the princesses from the Disney line. We have the Belle, Little Mermaid, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella. Another picture we have here the Snow White, the famous Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Who would forget the story of a princess who lived in a home in the forest with the 7 dwarfs? Next is the short story. A short story is like a way of storytelling and it can usually be done in one setting. Example of a short story is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. This story talks about the journey of a prince where he lived in a world where he is the only one who lived. When you start this journey, you will feel that this story talks about how to tame, how to be friendly, how to be a person that everyone must adore. And the other famous story of all time is The Necklace by Guy de Maupassant. This story talks about a lady who borrowed a necklace, and the moral of the story is that never lie. Always tell the truth because you'll never know what consequences arise from it. So short story are very short, a story that you can be understand and can be read in just one setting. Next is the folklore. What is a folklore? A folklore are songs, stories, myths, and proverbs that was handed and down by mouth. Actually, folklore, especially our culture, we are rich in folklore based from the stories which is handed by our ancestors. And one of the famous folklore is the Juan Tamad. Who would forget the story about Juan Tamad, who is a lazy person, right? Another example is Lamang. Of course, we all know that Lamang is a hero about story of a person who fight for his country. Next is the horror. What is a horror? It is usually an overwhelming and painful ending caused by literature that is frightfully shocking, terrifying, or revolving. I have here the Annabelle, who is one of the famous horror story in all over the world. And in the Philippines, we have the longest series, The Shake, Rattle, and Roll. The role of horror stories are usually to scare us, to frighten us, because you will feel the intense, especially in a scene where we can see that someone is hiding, someone is looking, without even knowing on the other part, and that is horror. Next is the legend. What is a legend? A legend is a story about national or folk hero which include an imaginative materials. Example of this is the legend of the guava. When we say about the legend, it talks about how things are started or how, example, where does guava started? What is the story of a guava and how it is being sold at its called as a guava? Another example is the Malakas at si Maganda, wherein they were came from Biak na Kawayan. We have a lot of different stories that from the ancestors about legends. Thank you. That would be all, and thank you for watching.